Morning and welcome to the webinar. I'm Katie Sieverding, Government Relations Coordinator for the South Dakota Retailers Association. Use tax is an aspect of South Dakota's tax system that is often misunderstood and overlooked by businesses. Today's webinar will help you understand what use tax is and what it applies to. Our featured presenters are Brandy Eckhart and Chantel Kocher of the South Dakota Department of Revenue. Brandy is a call center agent and Chantel is a tax discovery agent. They work in the areas of tax discovery, compliance, collections, licensing, and reviews. They gather information provided by taxpayers and formulate the best response or action necessary. A couple of notes before we start the presentation. The phones of all attendees are muted, so we won't be hearing any background noises. There is a handout section that we have provided for you. They appear under the handouts tab on the side of the screen. We have two versions of the PowerPoint presentation. It has full page slides and the other is 3 slides per page with a note-taking version. There is a tax facts publication on use tax and a tax facts publication on health services. We'll have a question and answer period at the conclusion of the presentation. You can ask a question at any time by going to the webinar panel on the side of your screen. You should see a questions box. Just type in your question and click on send. If you don't see the questions panel, you may need to click on the arrow to maximize it. You are also welcome to email questions to us. At the conclusion of the presentation, I'll read the questions out loud and Brandy and Chantel will provide the answers. We'll now turn the presentation over to Chantel.
Hi everybody, and welcome to our presentation on use tax. The start of the presentation, what is use tax? It's the tax on tangible personal property, services, and products transferred electronically when no sales tax or not enough sales tax was paid. Use tax is charged at the same rate that sales tax is charged. A question that you might have, why didn't a retailer charge me sales tax? Sellers or retailers who do not have Nexus, which is a physical presence in South Dakota, cannot be legally required to collect sales tax. This is based on the Supreme Court decision. Most internet companies, such as Amazon, do not have a physical presence in South Dakota, but they are able to voluntarily report tax. Recently, we did have Senate Bill 106, which outlines some points with remote sellers, and it's currently ongoing, but we did send letters out to certain internet companies, and they are able to currently voluntarily report, which is what Amazon is currently doing. As a side note on that, I would still say any purchases that are made via the internet, always double check your receipts to see if sales tax is charged and make sure it is the correct rate as well. Okay, application of use tax. When sales tax is not properly charged by the retailer, then the client or customer is responsible for paying the use tax. Retailers report sales tax, the purchaser or the client reports the use tax. And as I said, it's the same rate, state rate and city rate as sales tax. This includes freight and delivery charges. The example you can see says that you purchase a book for $15 and it's $2 shipping. If sales tax isn't charged on your invoice, you owe use tax on the $17 amount. If you purchase a product or a service exempt from sales tax, that means it's also exempt from use tax. Okay, use tax is normally due when a business takes items from inventory for personal use. Items are purchased without sales tax, such as out-of-state suppliers from the internet or mail-in orders. When services are purchased without sales tax, and on receipts for rentals or equipment brought in from another state. This also applies to construction materials for construction companies when the item is purchased without sales tax, removed from inventory, then use tax would also be due on that. Use tax would be due on promotional items that businesses purchase and service providers that purchase items used to provide their service. In continuation of that, when state sales tax was paid but no city tax, which is municipal tax, was charged, or if you purchase it outside of city limits and bring it within the city, sales tax wouldn't be charged for the city because you purchased it and took possession of it outside of city limits. But when you bring it within those city limits to use it or consume it, you owe the 2% usually city tax on that for use tax. And the examples here is that a mowing business is located outside of city limits. They purchase a new mower or piece of equipment and they are charged 4.5% state sales tax because they took possession of it outside of city limits. Later, that lawn mowing business took it into city limits and used it to cut somebody's grass. Then they owe the 2% municipal city tax in use tax. And then the bottom point is that the company didn't report the city tax when they brought it within city limits, and they happen to have an audit. So Department of Revenue would assess the company municipal use tax for the cost of the mower. And then these are just some of the errors that are found when an auditor audits a business. So something to be on the lookout for when you're looking through your records and books. Under reporting of sales, use, and/or excise tax due to not keeping records properly. Not remitting use tax on goods and services purchase exempt from tax and then used. So if you purchase something that doesn't have sales tax on it and then you use it in the course of your business, use tax is due on that. Number 3 is not remitting use tax on items taken from inventory and given away, used in business or for personal use. So anytime an item is used and you didn't pay sales tax on it, use tax is due. Number 4, and we run into this a little more often, is exempting sales to taxable customers, such as churches and clinics. Churches and clinics are not automatically exempt from sales tax. My recommendation and the department's recommendation is always get an exemption certificate from your clients or customers, which is your way of showing why you didn't charge tax. And if you don't have it, charge the tax. And that leads into number 5, not having a valid exemption certificate on file. We ask that you guys keep records for 3 years because that's the amount of time that we can review an active license going back. So as long as you have those exemption certificates on file to prove why you didn't charge sales tax, that's what we're looking for. Another error that we run into is reporting errors with the city tax or municipal tax. Okay, and then the 7-year rule is if use tax is due on a product not originally purchased for use in South Dakota, it is then brought into South Dakota for use or consumption. The product is less than 7 years old and an equivalent or greater amount of sales or use tax was not previously paid. So age is determined by manufacturer date, and if that is not available, then you use the purchase date. And the example it gives is a business in Minnesota relocates to South Dakota. They transfer equipment from inside the Minnesota plant to the South Dakota location. If the equipment that they bring in is less than 7 years old, use tax is due on the fair market value at the time that it is brought into South Dakota. And that is provided that sales tax was not already paid in Minnesota at a even or greater value. Statute of limitations here. Due to South Dakota law, 3 years from the date of the return reporting the taxes filed or due. So what that means is the 3 years that I touched on earlier. We can go back 3 years and audit and review the paperwork and filing information. And when it comes to audits, an auditor will send you a notice of intent, and that will go from the notice of intent back 3 years. There is exceptions to this rule, so the 3 years applies to a business that has an active South Dakota sales tax or excise tax license. There are no limitations when the business is not licensed in South Dakota, or if the business fails to file a return, if the business files a fraudulent return, or if the business fails to remit tax for a return that has been filed already. There are some use tax exemptions for banks and insurance companies. The sales tax is due when a bank or an insurance company purchases a service. However, if that company that provides the service does not charge sales tax, the banks and the insurance companies are not responsible for reporting use tax on the transactions. Inventory. If a retailer, I guess it says, does a retailer owe use tax when they take items out of untaxed inventory to donate or use? Yes. The example given is that a clothing store takes items of clothing from inventory for their personal use or donation. Let's say the store paid $75 wholesale for the item, but they retail it in the store for $50. Use tax is due on the store's cost, which is $75, not the $150. So use tax would be due on the $75 amount. And then just to touch on donations a little more, and the law at the top is quoted. Donations of untaxed inventory. The taxability depends on the entity receiving the donation. So if you're donating to an exempt entity and get the exemption certificate, then no use tax would be due on that. If you are giving it to a non-exempt entity, you would owe use tax on your cost of the product given. Okay, and then just to continue that on a step further, donations of services or labor is if you charge for your service and then donate the proceeds to an exempt organization or entity, the charge is subject to sales tax because you're charging the you're charging for the service. If you're providing a service free of charge, for example, if you go to a hairstylist goes to a women's shelter and provides haircuts free of charge, that would not be subject to use tax because there's no money transaction there. Another example would be if an accounting firm or accountants provided tax services to senior citizens. If the senior citizens pay for the service, it's taxable. If it's a free service, it's not taxable. Demonstration items. When they're used for demonstration only, no use tax is due, but if they turn around and sell the demonstration item, you charge sales tax at the time that it's sold. If the demonstration item is used by the business, use tax is due, and if the item is sold at a later date, then sales tax would also be due on the same item. Samples. Samples given away free of charge are subject to sales or use tax. The example would be if you go to the grocery store and they're giving away samples of food items. The store is responsible for paying the use tax on the samples that they're giving away. All right, next one would be a restaurant or a bar. These are examples of items that are subject to use tax if they are purchased and sales tax is not charged for them. So if a bartender gives away a free drink, the tax is still due on that drink or even a food item. If the restaurant or bar is giving away promotional items for free, use tax is due on those. If you purchase equipment, especially from out-of-state vendors, check your receipts, and use tax would be due if no sales tax was charged on that. One of the, I guess, exceptions to the rule would be containers that you would put takeout food in. It's okay to purchase those for resale, but the rest of the items on the list would not be subject to be purchased for resale. Another note on that is if you purchase locally, your receipt should show that sales tax is charged, but I will stress again, always check your receipts to make sure that sales tax is charged and that the appropriate amount is charged. Continuing on, office supplies. These are examples of office supplies that would be subject to use tax if sales tax is not paid at the original purchase time. Computers and printers, software, including antivirus but not limited to, furnishings for your office, files, folders, pens, pencils, envelopes and paper, printer cartridges, artwork or pictures for the wall, magazines, if you have a magazine subscription, internet access, certain subscriptions, well, not certain subscriptions, all subscriptions to websites, and if you pay for online storage. Another type of specific example would be for body shops. These items are subject to sales tax or use tax. Sandpaper, rags, cleaner, masking tape, plastic, tools, and equipment. These are all being used by the body shop, so they cannot be purchased tax exempt. Paint would be okay to purchase tax exempt because the body shop does have the ability to resell it. And if you're not charged sales tax, then the use tax is due on those items. All right, contractors. This can go two ways. You can look at it as a contractor as a business, or if you are personally having something done to your home. So this would obviously apply both ways. Nobody is exempt from contractor's excise tax. Unlike sales tax, where an exempt entity can provide a certificate saying that they're exempt, it's not applicable to contractor's excise tax. Okay, and then we have examples here that show that you pay sales tax or use tax in addition to the contractor's excise tax. So on building materials, owner furnished materials, and what owner furnished materials are is just what it sounds like. If I hire a contractor to come into my house and replace all my windows, but instead of having the contractor purchase the windows for me, I purchase them myself and provide those materials or those windows to him, I need to provide him with the amount that I paid for them because he still owes the contractor's excise tax on the amount that I paid for them. Any supplies that a contractor would use in the normal course of business, any services that they may need, such as engineering or architectural help in whatever project they are on. They owe sales or use tax on any tools and any equipment that they use in the course of their business. And it says, by statute, contractors subject to the excise tax are the users and consumers of all material used in a project. Contractors owe tax on all materials used by them, even if given to them by an exempt entity like a government agency. So that's what I had touched on earlier, is that a government agency would not be exempt from the contractor's excise tax, even if they're purchasing the materials exempt from sales. Okay, other services that could be subject or that would be subject to sales tax or use tax. Any consulting services, accounting services, attorney or lawyers, online software help service, and online gaming. When a business or an individual hires an unlicensed service provider and you do not get charged sales tax, use tax is due where you purchase or where you're going to use the service at. So the example given here is I hire an out-of-state accounting firm to complete tax returns in Beersford. They provide an invoice, but they don't charge South Dakota sales tax because they were never in the state, which is Nexus. Therefore, the store in Beersford would owe state tax and city tax because they received the service inside city limits at the store in Beersford. Service providers. Service providers are the user or consumer of all tangible personal property and services they purchase. Service providers are not limited to what my automatic thought would be like telecommunications services. It would be above and beyond that, such as building cleaning and maintenance, any detective, security, or fire alarm services, laundry and dry cleaning services, lawn care and gardening, motor vehicle towing, pet grooming, pet sitting, kennel services, massage therapists, hotel lodging, renting of rooms, campgrounds, that type of lodging, and even granting of memberships to sports or athletic facilities. So any of those businesses, and it's not limited to that list, but that just gives you an idea of the broader service providers. Those service providers supplies used or consumed in providing their service are always taxable. And then we will touch on reciprocity. Per the laws listed, South Dakota will allow credit for sales or use tax paid to another state when you purchase equipment there and bring it into South Dakota. That is as long as that other state allows for a similar credit to South Dakota. So it's basically an agreement between certain states that if sales tax is paid in one state and then brought into another state, they agree that the difference is due between them. And we'll just go into examples on this. So if a computer is purchased in Iowa and 5% sales tax was paid to the retailer because the customer picked up the computer in Iowa and then brought it into Sioux Falls for use in an office, South Dakota use tax would be 6.5%. However, you would deduct the 5% as a credit that was already paid to Iowa, and the balance due would be 1.5% use tax in South Dakota. And then here's an example of no reciprocity, where a tax was charged incorrectly or not legally paid. It's Aberdeen customer purchases electronics online from a company in Texas. So all the transactions were done over the internet. The Texas-based company was never in South Dakota. The Texas company charged 5% Texas tax and shipped the computer or electronics to Aberdeen. Sales tax is due where the customer receives the product at. Therefore, the retailer should not have charged the 5% Texas sales tax. So the client or customer that purchased is still responsible for reporting 6.5% use tax, and although they already paid 5% on the Texas tax. So in that instance, what you would do is you would report your state and city tax for Aberdeen at 6.5% and then go back to the retailer in Texas and get a refund from them as they incorrectly charged 5% on the tax. Okay, and then we do have a taxpayer helpline that is currently manned 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Central Standard Time. There is an option to leave a message if the phones are extremely busy, and you will get a call back on that. We also do have the email, which is business or bustax@state.sd.us, which is monitored daily and distributed to various agents in various offices for follow-up. We also have 6 offices, which I'll show on the next slide, across South Dakota. So if you do have any questions, we encourage you to come in and ask them. Another feature that I will show you is the publications and tax facts on our website, which I find very useful. And then here are our office locations. And then we do have some social media outlets that you can follow on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and there is a blog as well. And I just noticed that didn't have the peer office on there. Okay, so in case you didn't get this information, I will put this here so you can copy it down, and then I will go to the web page here shortly, kind of show you how to navigate some really helpful and useful information on our website. And I will also get the address for the peer office. Okay, so dor.sd.gov. This will take you to the main page for the Department of Revenue. You have the taxes here, which you can go to business taxes, or the publications, which has the tax facts. And this isn't an all-inclusive list of every type of service or taxable question that you may have, but we are actively working on new ones and updating them as the laws do change. So our hope is to eventually have a majority of questions that you may have in tax facts, and they are really great reference points for any questions that you have that you can look into yourself, print off, and keep for your reference. And they also give really good examples. Let's go to one here. The bars and restaurants. And just a quick overview, I won't go through everything with you, but it has the certain underlined points, and it'll go through whether those are taxable, and it hits on hopefully most questions that you would have. And then in the boxes, it'll give you examples that you can compare to the situation or question that you may have. And then at the end, there is always a contact us if what the tax fact has doesn't encompass what you have. And there is our peer office address right here. Alrighty, I think we will go ahead and turn it over to Brandy now so that she can do the question and answer session that we have. So let me turn it over to her. Thank you, guys.
Okay, thank you, Chantel. While Brandy's getting set up, we did have a couple of questions come in, and I'll give her a few seconds and then I will start asking them.
I'm ready.
Okay, perfect. So we have if a medical business asks, Does use tax apply to all medical supplies, drugs, and disposable items?
All right, so we do have a tax fact on those questions. It's called health services, drugs, and medical devices. If it's for single use for a single patient, then it can be purchased for resale. But anything other than that would be taxable. And Chantel's pulling that up for us.
Okay. So I think we talked about this, and Chantel covered it in the presentation, but maybe just a reiteration of how are taxes handled on donated items? For example, food certificates given for charity fundraisers or school rewards.
Okay, if the donation is given to an exempt entity, then use tax is not due on that, their cost of that gift certificate. If it's not given to an exempt entity, then use tax is due on their cost of that.
Okay. What about a convenience store or food business? What items are subject to use tax? For example, if they purchase salt and pepper or paper products.
Okay. Again, we have another tax fact out there that Chantel had brought up previously, which is the bars and restaurants, that kind of hits on what can be purchased for resale and what cannot be purchased for resale. The grease used in restaurants can be purchased for resale, so no use tax would be due on that when you use it. The salt and pepper, if it's condiments are not taxable, so then use tax would not be due on them because it's going to the customer. They're using it in their food. And then again, refer to the bars and restaurants tax fact that gives specific examples of what would be purchased for resale and what would be taxed.
Okay, so if they're not charged sales tax for the pepper or the condiments, they don't owe use tax.
Correct.
If they're using them. Okay, for those certain items.
Correct.
Okay. Do you pay, and I think we touched on this one during the presentation too, but what about use tax on magazine subscriptions?
Yes, use tax would be due if sales tax is not charged at the time of purchase.
All right. So I ordered, I think again, we might have touched on this one. I ordered a computer from an out-of-state company for use in my business. I wasn't charged sales tax. Do I owe the use tax on that purchase? And if so, do I pay both the city and the state tax?
Yes, use tax is due, and it depends on where you receive the computer. If you received it out of city limits, but your business is located in city limits and you bring it in to use in the city, there could be different scenarios. So if you received it out of city limits, you'd pay the 4.5% use tax. But if then you later use it in the business in city limits, you owe that additional city tax. If it's just delivered to you at your place of business that is inside city limits, yes, you owe state and applicable city tax, use tax.
Okay.
And this is businesses and for personal use. So if you as a person purchased that not to use in your business, yes, and they didn't charge you tax, you would owe use tax on it.
Okay. So if it's a personal computer, let's say a laptop, and I live outside of city limits, I pay the state use tax if I wasn't charged sales tax. But what if it's a laptop, so I'm going all over the place. do I have to worry about use tax, the city portion of that use tax?
No.
Okay. What about restaurants who give employees complimentary meals? First of all, is there a difference between if they're on shift and they get a complimentary meal, or if they're off shift and they come in and they receive a discount? And then if you do owe use tax on that, is it based on the cost of the food, or the menu price, or the discounted price if you're giving it to someone at a discount?
So yes, use tax is due on complimentary meals. Use tax would be due on your cost of the food, not the menu price. And then as far as the discounted portion, it would be on the discounted. Whatever money could potentially be transferred hands. Obviously, in this situation, it's not, but that's what you would pay the use tax on.
Okay, so complimentary, it's on the cost of the employer cost of the food or the product, and then if it's just a discounted price, say half off the menu price, you use that price that you charge.
Correct.
Okay.
You can tell them it's up.
So when just for a clarification, if I sell products, should I be charging the use tax, or does the use tax just apply if my business purchases something that I wasn't charged tax on?
Use tax applies to you as the business. You wouldn't charge. I guess I'm not understanding that question, because you wouldn't charge a customer use tax.
You would charge them the sales tax, but then if you are looking at something and you weren't charged sales tax, then the use tax
You owe
applies.
the use tax, yes.
Okay. Jumping to lawn care now. Are the chemicals used for a lawn care business subject to use tax? If they're not charged tax when they purchase the item.
Okay, we have a landscaping and lawn care tax fact that is being pulled up right now. And what specifically are they asking for, like chemicals?
Yeah, this question was just about the chemicals that are used.
Okay. Well, we're going to have to come back to that question because chemicals is kind of broad. So we can look that up and come back to you.
Okay, sounds good. My next question is, I have a product, I sold a product to a customer, and I had a service where I had a company inspect that product that was sold. Do I pay use tax on that service, or was it for resale?
That cannot be purchased for resale because you're the end user of that product. So having it inspected is at your cost.
Okay, so use tax would be due on that inspection. That's
correct. Correct.
Okay, the next one I have is, the business sells and installs custom cabinetry. The customer is a hospital, so let's say it's exempt from sales tax. My question is regarding the use tax on the materials used on that job. Materials are purchased tax exempt, and we pay the tax once the job is completed and the materials are used. Do we still pay use tax on those materials for that hospital job?
Well, when you say we paid the tax once the job is complete, if you're saying that you paid it on our return form, then that means you paid the use tax on it. So no additional use tax would be due. Yes, you do owe use tax if you did not pay tax at any other point, because the exempt entity never paid sales tax on those materials.
Okay. The next question has to do with the reciprocity. How do we know if a state has reciprocity with South Dakota?
Okay, I believe we have that list available, so I think you would have to call the department for us to verify that if you as a business were not aware of what state has reciprocity.
Okay. Next question. Do you pay use tax for seminars or luncheons? So if the local chamber or association charges $15 for a luncheon, do you pay use tax on that?
Can you repeat that one more time?
It's dealing with use tax for seminars or luncheons. How do you pay use tax for a seminar or a luncheon, and how do you go about that? So if the local chamber is putting on a seminar and they charge $15 for a luncheon or a seminar.
If we could get that question in writing, we can absolutely answer that and get that submitted to you. We'll have to research that.
Okay. If a mechanic is located outside of city limits and some repairs were done to a car, that mechanic charges the state sales tax of 4.5% for fixing that car. But the customer who paid that resides in city limits and uses that car mostly in city limits. Is the mechanic required to collect the city sales tax also? Or is the customer responsible for the city if it has municipal tax in that city?
Okay, so if the mechanic is outside of city limits, we cannot require them to charge the city tax, although they can voluntarily report the city tax, knowing that their client is ultimately going to use that product within city limits. However, if it's not charged, then the client that uses the product inside city limits would then be responsible for the use tax on the additional city costs.
So the customer is then asked to send a check into the state for that remaining up to 2%. Is that correct?
Yes, we do have use tax returns online, and as an individual reporting that, you get to self-report it basically. So you fill out that return and you can wait for a whole year to report everything that you potentially purchased without the tax, and then report it at the end of the year and then send in that dollar amount to the state.
Okay, the next question is regarding an HVAC business. So this might be a little different than other businesses, but the question is, how do I determine when to use sales tax versus use tax. The business was told use tax is used when installing equipment or performing repair work in a permanent structure. But how do you define permanent structure? Or is there someone we could maybe get some more information on that topic?
HVAC installation is subject to contractor's excise tax. So if they're doing an install, they're going to charge their customer the excise tax plus the use tax on their cost of the materials. Sales tax only applies if they're actually just selling the unit without installation.
Okay, once they are installing it, even if they sold them the unit, if they're installing it, then it's the use tax and the contractor's excise tax?
Correct.
And Katie, just to expand on that a little bit, the HVAC company in this situation, if they're taking an item out of an inventory and using it to install into their customer's house, they're going to pay the use tax on the item that they took out of inventory, and they're also going to pay the excise tax on the total cost of the invoice and charge that to their client. So use tax is only due by an individual or a business when you get a final invoice or a receipt that's not charged sales tax on. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. Okay, so independent contractors then. If you pay an independent contractor for work, do I pay use tax on the amount paid to them?
No, it's contractor's excise tax. They might include an extra line item for use tax on their cost of materials if they're supplying the materials.
Okay. I think this next one you touched on, but maybe I think it's a good one to reiterate. If a state, school, city, or government office provides materials to install, are they subject to that 4.5% state sales tax plus any applicable municipal taxes?
If those materials are supplied to a contractor by an exempt entity, the contractor is ultimately responsible for use tax on the cost of those materials.
Okay, for delivery services, we currently offer free delivery at a coffee shop. Our employees deliver to businesses or other entities. Do we charge, we charge food tax. Is that the correct tax to be charging?
I'm sorry, we need that question repeated.
So it's about a delivery service, and an employee of the coffee shop is going out and making a delivery to businesses or groups. Do we charge the food tax, the sales tax, I would assume that means, or is it a use tax? I guess what do we owe in that scenario?
Okay, delivery is always taxable in the state of South Dakota, so it would be subject to sales tax.
Okay.
And Katie, just going into detail on that a little bit, to re-clarify sales tax versus use tax. Sales tax is going to be charged in this scenario by the restaurant or business that's delivering the food product. The only time that they would worry about use tax is if they purchase something for their business tax exempt and then used it in the course of their business without paying sales tax on it. So if they bought equipment, let's say, and weren't charged sales tax, then they're obviously going to use it in their business. Use tax is due on the equipment. In most scenarios that you guys are providing or asking, the company is in South Dakota, therefore it has nexus. They're required to have a sales tax license, and we should help them learn how to charge the correct sales tax. So most of our use tax is going to be either errors in that charge, which we're hoping that they're not, because we should be educating our taxpayers. But most use tax is going to come from retailers outside of the state that don't have a physical presence here, meaning they don't send a salesperson in, or they're not coming here to deliver the product personally. And that's when we're running into use tax issues. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. I think that was, thank you very much for that clarification. So I have a couple more use tax questions, and we talked about, you know, if you're going to give something complimentary, you pay the use tax on the cost of the item, or if you give it at a discount, you pay it at the discounted price. But what if you purchase something and then possibly use it as a display, or end up selling it for, or using it, or selling it for below cost, but below what you paid for it? Do you still get charged the tax, or you owe the tax on the amount that you paid for it initially, or that below cost selling price?
It would be at your selling price. So if you had something on display and you did not pay tax at time of purchase, but then later sold it at a discounted rate, you would owe the tax. The customer would owe the tax, the sales tax, on the discounted price it was sold for. Now, in another scenario, if you purchased something for display and you thought it was always going to be on display, so you paid use tax, but then later sold it, you still owe the sales tax, so you're paying tax twice.
Okay. But even if I sell it for below what I initially paid for it, then the sales tax is only due on that selling price?
Correct.
I paid more for it?
Yes.
What about membership dues? Do I owe use tax on yearly membership dues?
The great thing about sales tax and contractor's excise tax is that we don't know everything right off the top of our heads. So a lot of questions that you're asking, we're trying to, in the background, look them up. There's just such a huge spectrum of taxable, non-taxable, exemptions from what's supposed to be taxable, that it's virtually impossible to know everything off the top of our heads. So what Brandy's going to do for us quick is see if we can pull it up in our information, and then we will certainly touch on that. But to go back to the demonstration items, I have just a little tidbit of an example for reference. It says a vacuum store has 10 vacuums plugged in and lets the customers run them across the floor. No use tax is due on that scenario. If the store's janitor uses one of the vacuums to clean the carpets, then the use tax would be due on the cost of that vacuum. If the store in turn sells the vacuum that the janitor used, although the use tax was already paid, sales tax is still due on the cost of the product being sold to the customer.
Okay, yeah, I think that's a good example. And any of these questions that we don't get answered, I understand there's a lot of them coming in, and it is there's a lot of information and a lot of different scenarios. So we will get the answers from you guys, you know, we'll get them via email and send them out to the people that had these questions. So we'll just go with a couple more if we have, I think we have a couple more minutes.
Okay, on the membership dues, the membership dues is a very broad spectrum. We need an actual what-if scenario to narrow it down because membership organizations could be exempt and they couldn't be. So we need an exact, detailed question to be able to answer.
Okay.
And again, they can always call in and we can get that specific information, or if you wanted to provide it via email, we can also answer it.
Okay, sounds good. We'll get you a more specific information on that one. What if taxes, okay, tax was paid on an item that was shipped to me, but no tax was collected or paid on the postage. Is tax then due on the postage that it cost, the actual amount, if there was no charge for shipping or something? Do I owe use tax for that postage?
Okay, postage is not taxable. Now, shipping and handling and delivery, that is taxable.
Okay.
So yeah.
So if a company ships me something, charges me $15 for a shipping fee, but only charged me sales tax on, or tax on the goods that were shipped, then I would owe tax on that $15?
Correct, yes.
Okay, this is one we, I think that you said we would get more information on. So if this is one we can't answer right now, you can just let us know. But someone asked, SDRA holds seminars, and let's say someone attends one of our seminars, and it costs $50 to attend. Does the person owe use tax if we didn't charge them any sort of tax?
Again, this is another broad spectrum scenario because it depends on who's holding it. They could be exempt. It depends on if the person receiving the seminar is requesting CEUs to continue their education. It could be exempt. So again, since all these scenarios come into play, we would need a more specific, this is who is holding it, this is how much they are charging, and then we can answer that question.
Okay, but it does deal with the person that's holding the event, not the speakers or anything that are presenting at the event? Does it have anything to do with them and how much, if they're being paid or not paid? We can skip that one. We'll get you more information on that one.
All right, sounds good.
How long does a person have before they have to report use tax on an item?
Again, we like to say about a year. If it's a person, a personal use, they have a year to collect all of their receipts that may not have been charged tax and added up onto one return form. If it's a business, it has to be reported in the period in which they're using it.
Okay. When filing a return to the state, does use tax have to be listed separately with the sales tax, or is it on the same line?
Use tax is on line 2 of our return, or line 2 on the ePass system. Chantel's bringing it up for an example. So on line 1, you would put your gross sales for that period, and then anything that you have to report use taxes on line 2, and they get added together.
Okay, perfect.
And Katie, just kind of backing up a second here. When Brandy said that the businesses report the period that they use them in, anytime that you have a sales tax license, you're set up on a schedule. So you can either report monthly, bi-monthly, quarterly, or there's some custom ones that we have. But if you're receiving a product and you report monthly and you received the computer from out of state, realized sales tax wasn't charged on it and your business owes use tax on it, you're going to report it on that July return when you received it.
Okay, thank you. This one has to do with farmers markets and craft fairs. So some invoices or purchase prices at these farmers markets and craft fairs are a flat price, say $25. How do I know if the vendor has included sales tax in the purchase price or if I owe use tax on the purchase price of the $25?
You have to specifically ask them if tax is included in the price. If it is, then they are paying it. If not, then the customer owes the use tax. But if they have the license, they should be collecting and remitting it.
Okay, thank you.
And just going a step further on that, if they're in South Dakota, obviously if you go down to your local farmer's market and they're selling a product, they should have a sales tax license and they should be reporting that tax because they're in business in South Dakota and that's part of the South Dakota law. So if you buy something and it is in question, I would ask them directly. And then as a business or just a personal consumer, you're always welcome to call our office to verify if a business that you've seen in town has a license or not.
Okay, great. Well, I think that is about all the questions that we have. Do you guys have anything else you want to add after all the questions that came through?
Just that we will look up and get a response back when you email us over that list of questions that we need a little more information on or a little more time to research. And also, please, if you have any questions or anything that you want answered, call the 800 number. We have very knowledgeable agents on the phone lines that the majority of the time can look up the answer while they're with you and get you an answer that you need. And if not, they're very diligent about looking it up and getting back to you. So we really want to stress that we're here for you. We're here to help you. We want you to understand tax so that you're reporting it correctly. And if you do happen to have an audit or a review, it's not a bad thing. What we try to do with those is educate the taxpayers so that they're confident in reporting taxes and that we're making sure that it's a fair across the board. Everybody's reporting taxes correctly and nobody's not reporting if we can help it as far as nexus.
Perfect. Could you put that contact information, that 1-800 number up one more time for everyone? So if they hadn't written it down, they can write it down. All right, great. Well, if you guys don't have anything else, I think that will be the conclusion of our webinar today. I want to thank you, Brandy and Chantel, again for putting this on for us. It was a lot of great information. And I want to remind everyone that this webinar was recorded, so a link to the recording will be emailed to all the participants later this afternoon. And our next webinar will focus on etiquette issues that businesses should be aware of when it comes to customers and employees who have disabilities. That webinar will be held on October 25th. We also have a series of labor law seminars coming up next week in Watertown, Sioux Falls, and Rapid City. They're a great opportunity to find out what your rights and responsibilities are as an employer. Visit our website at www.sdra.org for details. Thank you to everyone for participating in today's program.